My son-in-law got promoted. He took the whole family out to celebrate at the nicest steakhouse in town, but not me. Hours later, I got his text. The grill needs cleaning before we get back, and fix that squeaky step while you're at it. I just replied, okay. Then I quietly packed my bags and left. That night, when they came home laughing and a little drunk, they opened the door and found something they weren't expecting. The house was clean. The grill was not touched, and I was gone. My name is Leonard Whitfield. I'm 65 years old. For 38 years, I worked as a general contractor. I built houses, fixed what broke, showed up on time, never complained. My wife Dorothy passed 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand when she went. After that, the house we'd shared for 30 years felt like it was caving in on me. Every room had something of hers in it. Her reading chair, the quilt she made the winter Philip was born, the coffee mug with the chip on the handle that she refused to throw away because she said it still worked fine. I kept the house for about 4 months after the funeral. Then I couldn't anymore. That's when Carol called. Carol is my daughter. She was 33 at the time, working as a vice principal at an elementary school. Good job, good head on her shoulders. She married Gareth Harmon when she was 29. Gareth was in sales, regional logistics, drove a company truck, and wore dress shirts on the weekends like he was always headed somewhere important. He was 36 when this all started. They had 2 kids, Philip, who was 7 then, and Nadine, who was 4. Good kids, still are. Carol called one Sunday and said they'd been thinking about getting a bigger house, better school district, more yard, room for the kids to grow. The problem was the down payment. They needed $72,000 and only had about half. She asked if I wanted to come stay with them. She said it like she was doing me a favor. You won't be alone, Dad. The kids love you. It makes sense for everyone. I thought about the empty house. I thought about the quilt in the reading chair. I sold the house Dorothy and I built together. $120,000. I handed Gareth $72,000 for the down payment and kept the rest. Before we signed anything, the notary, Mr. Gerald Sutton, pulled me aside. He'd handled our paperwork for over 20 years. He said, Leonard, since you're covering the full down payment, I'm putting the deed in your name. You can transfer it whenever you're ready. But this way you're protected if anything changes. I said that was fine. Gareth shook my hand and said, we'll sort the transfer paperwork soon, Leonard. No rush. We're family. We never sorted it. I moved into the spare bedroom on the ground floor of the new house at 412 Sutter Creek Lane. It had decent light and was close to the garage, which mattered to me because within a month I'd set up a proper workshop out there. That's just how I'm wired. I need to be doing something. The first few months weren't bad. I made breakfast most mornings, took Philip to the bus stop, picked up Nadine from daycare when Carol had late meetings. I did the grocery runs, kept the yard clean. On weekends I worked on the house. I rebuilt the back deck from scratch because the original one had soft spots that bothered me. I installed new kitchen cabinets because Carol mentioned offhand that she didn't love the ones that came with the house. I redid the wiring in the garage so it could handle real equipment. I caulked, patched, painted, fixed. A general contractor doesn't know how to sit still. I kept every receipt, photographed every invoice, and sent the records monthly to my nephew Clifford Whitfield, who is a real estate and family law attorney. I'd been doing that kind of documentation for 38 years. Old habit, good one, as it turned out. Gareth traveled a lot for work. When he was home, he had a way of making me feel like a guest who had overstayed. He never said it outright. He was smarter than that. It was the small things. I'd finish a weekend project on the house and he'd look at it and say, not bad. Like he was grading an apprentice. He'd have his friends over and introduce me as Carol's dad. He stays with us, rather than just my name. When he was on the phone with colleagues and I walked through the room, he'd turn slightly, like he was shielding the conversation. He never called me Leonard if he could avoid it. To his friends, I was the old man. I heard it through the garage wall on more than one occasion. Once I heard him say, yeah, he does a lot of the work around here. Keeps him busy. They laughed. I kept sanding the shelf I was working on. I was not in a single family photo on their social media. Not one. Carol would post birthday dinners, backyard barbecues, holiday mornings. Gareth, the kids, Carol's mother when she visited, Gareth's brother, and his wife. Me nowhere. After a while, I stopped looking at my phone when I knew she'd posted something. It was easier that way. There's something particular about being invisible in a house you paid for and built with your own hands. It's not just loneliness. It's a specific kind of thing that's hard to name. You walk through the kitchen and you see the cabinets you hung and the countertop you leveled and the light fixture you replaced, and none of it has your name on it. It's just the house, their house, the way they talk about it. Never our house, never with any acknowledgement of where any of it came from. I thought about Dorothy a lot during those months. She would have seen it clearly from day one. She had that ability. She would have sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "Leonard, you need to say something." She was always better at that than me. I'm built for fixing things with my hands. The other kind of fixing I tend to put off until it's overdue. The second year was when things got harder to ignore. Gareth started having his colleagues over more often. Friday evenings mostly, sometimes Saturday afternoons. Carol would be there playing the good host, and I'd be in the kitchen making food that ended up on the table without anyone asking how it got there. Gareth would pour drinks and hold court in the living room while I cleaned up afterward. One evening, his manager came over, a man named Al, and Gareth gave him a tour of the house. I heard him in the hallway pointing out the cabinets, the deck, the workshop setup in the garage. "We really put some work into this place," he said. I was standing 10 feet away washing dishes. Al said the deck looked solid. Gareth said, "Yeah, we're pretty handy." I dried my hands and went to bed early that night. Carol noticed sometimes. I could tell by the way she'd find me in the garage the next morning and talk a little extra, ask if I wanted to go to the hardware store with her, small things. She wasn't a bad person. She was caught between two things and she didn't know how to stand in the middle of it without losing her balance. I understood that. I just wish she'd tried harder. The incident that stays with me most from that period happened on a Saturday in the fall. Philip had a baseball game. I'd been to every one that season, kept his stats in a notebook, helped him work on his stance in the backyard. I was the one who found his glove when he lost it, oiled it, broke it back in. That Saturday, I was already in the car when Gareth came out and said they were taking one car to save the hassle of parking. "Not enough room, Leonard. We'll fill you in when we get back." He said it casual. No hesitation, like it was a perfectly reasonable thing to say to a man about his own grandson's game. I watched them back out of the driveway. Philip had his face turned away. I don't know if he saw me standing there. That was the day I went back to the toolbox and took out the deed for the first time in 2 years. I just looked at it. My name clear as anything in Mr. Gerald Sutton's notary script. Owner, Leonard Ray Whitfield. I put it back and went to the workshop and built a step stool for Nadine's bathroom, kept my hands moving. That's how I handled things back then. About 6 months before everything came to a head, I mounted an old dash cam on a shelf bracket in the garage workshop, angled toward the main work area. I'd overheard Gareth out there one evening with 2 of his friends, and I caught the tail end of something I wasn't meant to hear. One of them said something about the neighborhood, property values, how things had gone up. Gareth said, "Once the old man's out, we flipped this place for $420,000 easy." They laughed. I was in the hallway just outside the door. I stood there for a moment, then walked back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The next morning, I ordered the dash cam online, $38. I ran the cable behind a shelf and mounted the unit where it looked like a piece of equipment storage. The motion sensor activated it when anyone entered the garage. Over the next 6 months, it recorded 14 separate sessions. Gareth and friends mostly. Gareth on the phone. Gareth and his brother one Sunday afternoon. Some of it was nothing. Some of it was very much something. I also started being more careful with the spreadsheet. Every receipt, every hour of labor I could document, every material I purchased. I had already been sending monthly summaries to Clifford, but I started adding a column for estimated labor value at standard contractor rates. After 3 years, the total came to $121,000. That covered the $72,000 down payment and $69,000 in documented materials and improvements. It did not cover the labor. If I had billed at market rate for every hour I put into that house, the number would have been considerably higher. Clifford knew what I was building. He never asked me directly. He just sent a reply every month that said received and filed, and once, after a particularly detailed entry that included the full master bath renovation, he wrote, "Uncle Len, you keep this up and you'll have the most documented property in the county." I sent back a thumbs up. That was the extent of our communication on the matter for most of that period. Then came the night I opened the shared computer and found the email. I wasn't looking for anything. I wanted to check the weather. Gareth's email was open in the browser, already logged in. The subject line was sitting right there in the inbox, property valuation, 412 Sutter Creek Lane. I should have closed it. I didn't. The thread went back 6 weeks. Gareth had initiated contact with a real estate agent named Patrice Odom at a local brokerage. He had asked for a full market appraisal. He had asked about listing timelines. In one message he wrote, "We'll need to resolve the co-owner situation first, but I expect that to be sorted within the year." Co-owner situation. That was me. That was how he described me to a real estate agent, a situation to be resolved. I read the thread twice. Then I closed the browser tab, walked to the back porch, and stood outside in the cold for about 15 minutes. The grill I had assembled bolt by bolt on a Saturday morning while Gareth was golfing sat there in the dark. I looked at it for a while. Then I went inside and picked up my phone and called Clifford. Clifford picked up on the second ring. It was past 10 at night, and he sounded wide awake, like he'd been expecting the call for a while. "Uncle Len, what happened?" I told him about the email. I read him the key parts from memory. I heard him go quiet on the other end, the kind of quiet that means someone is thinking hard and fast. "He contacted a realtor to sell a house he doesn't own." Clifford said, "That's correct, and the deed is still in your name, fully. No partial transfer, nothing recorded with the county." "Nothing. I checked the copy I keep here, same as the day Mr. Sutton filed it." Another pause. Then Clifford said, "Uncle Lynn, combined with the financial documentation you've been sending me, and depending on what's on those garage recordings, we may be looking at attempted financial exploitation of an elderly adult." "That's not just a civil matter," I said. I understood. "My office, tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, bring everything. The deed, the spreadsheet printouts, the USB from the dash cam, all of it." I said I'd be there. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a while. The house was quiet. Gareth and Carol were still out at the restaurant. The kids were at Carol's mother's for the night. I could hear the refrigerator hum and the occasional car pass outside. That was it. I thought about Dorothy. Not in a sad way, exactly. More like consulting her. She had a clarity about people that I never quite matched. She sized up Gareth the first Thanksgiving he came to dinner, before he and Carol were even engaged. She didn't say anything bad about him. She just said, "He's a man who keeps score, Leonard. Make sure you know what game you're playing." I thought she was being too hard on him. I was wrong about that. I got up and went to the back of my closet. On the floor, underneath a canvas drop cloth I'd kept from my contracting days, was my father's old metal toolbox. Scratched up, heavy, with a combination lock I'd had since I was 19. Inside, under the tray of spare drill bits and worn-down chisels, was a manila envelope. The deed to 412 Sutter Creek Lane. I took it out and set it on the bed. I looked at my name on it. Then I took the USB drive from the shelf above the workbench, the one loaded with the dashcam footage, and set it next to the envelope. I printed the last 6 months of spreadsheet entries from my laptop, folded them into the envelope along with the deed, and put everything into my old leather document bag that Dorothy had given me years ago for a birthday. Then I did something I had been thinking about for several months without letting myself fully think about it. I packed a bag, not everything. I wasn't emptying the room, just what was mine in a way that couldn't be disputed. My clothes, my father's watch from the nightstand drawer, the framed photo of Dorothy and me at the coast, the one from our last trip before she got sick, my coffee maker, the one I'd brought from the old house, my books, the small wooden box I'd made with Philip one afternoon, the first time I taught him how to use a chisel. It took about 45 minutes. I was careful, and I was quiet. Before I left, I took a piece of nota paper from the desk in my room and wrote 4 sentences. I kept it short because there wasn't much that needed explaining. "Gareth, I built every inch of this house. Check whose name is on the deed. You will be hearing from my attorney, Leonard." I folded it around a photocopy of the deed's signature page and put it in an envelope. I left it on Gareth's desk in the home office, centered where he would see it the moment he walked in. Then I picked up my bag and my document case, took one walk through the main floor, and left through the garage. I stood in the driveway for a minute. I looked at the deck I'd rebuilt, the new gutters I'd hung the previous spring, the repaired concrete at the base of the front steps. All solid work that would outlast whatever came next. I called Howard Briggs from the end of the driveway. Howard was 67, retired, had owned an auto shop for 30 years before he sold it. We'd been friends since our kids were in Little League together. He'd had a spare room since his wife's sister moved out 2 years back, and he'd offered it to me more than once. "Tonight," he said, "if that's all right. Doors unlocked, I'll put the coffee on." That was the whole conversation. That's the thing about a friendship that's been going 25 years. You don't have to explain everything. I drove to Howard's house and I didn't look back at the street when I turned out of the neighborhood. I was done looking back at that particular address. Howard had the coffee ready and a sandwich on the counter. We sat at his kitchen table and I told him the whole story, start to finish. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always valued about him. When I finished, he refilled my cup and said, "Sounds like you've been patient longer than most men would have been." I said I wasn't sure if that was a compliment. He said, "It's an observation. What happens now is the part that matters." I went to bed in Howard's spare room at about 1 in the morning. It was the first night in a long time. I didn't lie awake listening to that house settle. Carol called at 7 in the morning. I was already up, sitting at Howard's kitchen table with a second cup of coffee. She was crying but not falling apart. That's Carol. She gets herself together even when she's upset. She said she'd found the envelope on Gareth's desk when she came home the night before. She said Gareth had read the note and gone very quiet in a way she'd never seen from him before. She said she was sorry. She didn't ask me to come back. She just said she was sorry and that she needed to understand what was happening. I told her I'd be at Mr. Gerald Sutton's office on Thursday at 10 in the morning and that Clifford would be with me and that Gareth needed to be there too. She said, "Dad, is this as serious as it feels?" I said, "It's serious, but it doesn't have to end badly. That part is up to Gareth." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay," and we hung up. Clifford's office was in a 2-story brick building near the courthouse. I was there at 7055. He had the conference table already set up when I walked in. Printouts, a laptop, 2 legal pads. He poured me a coffee, and we went through everything for 2 hours. The deed, the financials, the dashcam files, the email thread with the real estate agent. Clifford watched 2 of the garage recordings and didn't say much, just made notes on his legal pad with a lot of underlines. When we finished, he leaned back and said, "Uncle Len, the real estate email alone is a problem for him, but combined with recordings of him explicitly discussing flipping a property he doesn't own and $141,000 in documented contributions from you, this is a very strong position. Under state elder financial protection statutes, what he was planning could be classified as financial exploitation. That carries civil liability and potential criminal referral." I asked him what I actually wanted out of it. He said, "That's the right question. What do you want?" I told him I didn't want to put Carol through a criminal proceeding. I didn't want to blow up my grandchildren's home, but I wanted the deed respected. I wanted the money acknowledged, and I wanted Gareth to understand in a room with a notary present exactly what he had tried to do and what it cost him. Clifford nodded. "We can do all of that." Thursday morning, I arrived at Mr. Gerald Sutton's office at 9:45. Clifford was beside me. Mr. Sutton greeted us at the door with a handshake and the look of a man who had seen versions of this situation before. His office had dark wood furniture and smelled like old paper and coffee, the way a notary's office should. Gareth and Carol arrived at 10:02. Gareth was in a jacket and tie. Carol wore a gray blazer. They looked like people who had not slept well. Gareth sat down across the table and put his hands flat on the surface and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not angry, not apologetic either. Careful, maybe, like a man who knows he's walked into something and is figuring out the exits. Mr. Sutton opened the meeting and laid out the basic facts, the deed, the owner of record, the total documented financial contribution. He read the number out loud, $141,000. Gareth said, "I know the deed is in his name. That was a temporary arrangement." Clifford said, "There's no recorded agreement, no partial transfer filing, nothing with the county that supports a temporary arrangement. The deed is clean and current in my client's name." Gareth said, "We had an understanding." Clifford slid a printed copy of the real estate email thread across the table. "6 weeks ago, you contacted Patrice Odom at Lakeview Realty and requested a market appraisal and listing timeline for this property. You described the owner of record as a co-owner situation to be resolved. Can you explain what resolution you had in mind?" Gareth looked at the printout. He looked at Carol. Carol was looking at the table. He said, "I was exploring options." Clifford said, "With a property you don't own." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Clifford opened his laptop and turned it so the screen faced across the table. He played 40 seconds of audio from the garage recording. Gareth's voice, clear and casual, saying exactly what he'd said to his friend about flipping the place once the old man was out. Carol closed her eyes. Gareth sat back in his chair. The careful expression was gone. He looked like a man who had just watched something he'd built fall over. I let the silence sit for a few seconds. Then I spoke for the first time since the meeting started. "I'm not here to take your family's home away from my daughter and my grandchildren." I said, "I'm here because you were planning to take mine. There's a difference." Gareth didn't say anything. I laid out the terms I'd worked out with Clifford. I retain full ownership of the deed. Gareth and Carol sign a formal lease at $950 a month with standard terms and no special provisions. They have 7 years to repay the $101 in documented contributions through structured monthly payments, or the property goes to market at current value and they arrange their own housing. The garage apartment I had finished building, which Gareth had never paid attention to because he never paid attention to what I was doing out there, would be rented separately to an outside tenant at $800 a month. Mr. Sutton would hold the repayment agreement in escrow and file all documents with the county that afternoon. Gareth looked at Carol. She looked at him with an expression that wasn't warm. She said, "Sign it." "Gareth," he signed. Beverly Marsh moved into the garage apartment 3 weeks later. She was a middle school science teacher, 51 years old, 2 kids, Earl, who was 15, and Rhonda, who was 12. She'd been renting month to month in a place that was raising her rate every few months, and she needed something stable. I showed her the apartment on a Tuesday evening, and she stood in the middle of the main room and looked at the built-in shelves and the good light coming through the west window and said, "You built all this yourself?" I said I had. She said she'd take it. She was a good tenant, paid on time, kept the place clean, didn't ask for anything she couldn't handle herself. Her kids were curious about the workshop, and I let them come in on weekends if they wanted. Earl turned out to have a good eye for measuring. Rhonda asked more questions than anyone I'd ever met. They reminded me that being around young people who are actually interested in learning something is one of the better things in life. Carol and I started talking again, slowly. Not about Gareth, not about the house, just the regular things. How the kids were doing in school, a book she was reading, a repair issue she didn't know how to describe, but I figured out from context was a loose hinge on a cabinet door. She drove out to Howard's one Saturday with Philip and Nadine, and we all had lunch. Philip had gotten taller. Nadine had lost a front tooth and was very proud of it. It was a good afternoon. The harder conversation happened about 6 weeks after the notary meeting. Carol came alone a Sunday morning, and we sat in Howard's backyard with coffee. She asked me if I had recordings of more than just the one clip Clifford had played at the meeting. I told her yes, there were 14 files total. She asked if she was in any of them. I said no, not in any meaningful way. She nodded and didn't ask anything else about it. I think she understood that I had made a choice about what to use and what to hold back, and she understood why. She said he's in therapy, individual. He didn't want to go, but I told him it wasn't optional. I said that was a reasonable position to take. She said, "Dad, I should have said something sooner, a lot sooner." I told her I knew that and that I wasn't carrying it against her, but that I needed her to understand it couldn't happen again. Not with me and not with anyone else in her life. She said she understood. I believed her. Gareth and I had one direct conversation about 2 months after the notary meeting. Carol had suggested it. He came to Howard's house on a weeknight, sat across from me at the kitchen table, and for about 10 minutes said a lot of things that were uncomfortable for him to say. He talked about pressure at work, about wanting to get ahead, about making bad decisions in his head that he told himself were just planning but that he knew were wrong. He didn't make excuses for the garage recordings. He said he was embarrassed by what he'd said and that he had no defense for it. I listened to all of it. When he was done, I said, "I'm not looking for an apology, Gareth. I'm looking for you to be straight with me going forward and to treat my daughter the way she deserves." That's it. He said he could do that. I said then we're okay. It wasn't a warm conversation, but it was an honest one, which is worth more. Thanksgiving came, and the whole family had dinner at the house on Sutter Creek. Beverly and her kids joined us. Carol made the turkey. Philip and Earl set the table and argued the entire time about the correct number of forks, which was the most entertaining thing that happened all week. Nadine sat next to Rhonda, and they whispered to each other throughout the whole meal like they'd been friends for years. After dinner, Philip came out to the workshop with me. He'd been asking for weeks to learn the next step after the box we'd built together. I showed him how to cut a dovetail joint. He measured twice, cut once, and got it right on the third try. He held the 2 pieces together, and they fit clean with no gap. He looked up with an expression I recognized because I'd felt it myself the first time something I built came out exactly right. I said, "That's a good joint." He said, "Can we do a whole drawer next time?" I said we could do a whole drawer next time. Gareth appeared in the workshop doorway at one point, watching. He stood there for a minute without saying anything. Then he said, "Leonard, dinner was good." I said I was glad. He nodded and went back inside. It was the first time he'd used my name without someone prompting him. I didn't make anything of it. Some things you just let land. I live in a small apartment in town now. The rent from Beverly and the monthly payments from Carol and Gareth cover my expenses and then some. I teach a free woodworking class on Saturday mornings out of the workshop at the house, mostly teenagers, a couple of retired guys who always meant to learn. It keeps me useful. I still see Carol every Sunday. I still have coffee with Howard most mornings. Clifford checks in once a month, still files everything. If you've spent years doing the work, holding things together, keeping your mouth shut because you told yourself it wasn't worth the trouble, I want you to hear this. Document everything. The money, the hours, the materials, all of it. Not because you're planning a fight, because a man who has proof of what he built has options that a man without it doesn't. And at some point, having options is the whole thing. Some men keep fixing the squeaky step. They keep cleaning the grill. I was that man for 3 years, I'm not anymore. If this story hit close to home, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you know a man who's been putting up with too much for too long, share this with him. Subscribe if you want more stories about people who decided enough was enough and handled it the right way.